Thank you everyone for coming for the Expert Speak uh, episode number 4. We are very lucky to have Deepak with us. Deepak is a very popular name in the Indian startup, product, mobile, growth, many communities. Uh, he's uh, he's been with startups like Paytm, Times, Internet, and has helped them scale, has helped them growth, and is also the curator of growthbug.com, which is something which a lot of us have been following for a long time. Right now, Deepak is starting up his new venture called Flat White, which is also the password for this talk today. And I wish him best for that. So without taking much of the time, I'll hand over to Deepak, where he would be speaking about uh, how to build common sense while building products. And he'll be sharing some of his experiences over next 20, 25, 30 minutes. And then we'll have the floor open for questions. If you have questions, please write down in the chat section so that we can take them in the right order. And also it will be great if you can have your cameras open so that Deepak can do it in a more interactive way. So thank you once again, Deepak, and over to you.
Thanks, Diwakar. Generally my Sunday evenings are reserved for my cycling, but unfortunately, last several weeks, this is what we are doing. But it's a good, I think, good to have it on a Sunday evening. I think we're a little more relaxed. There's little less work. Yeah. So hello everyone. Happy to be here. I've been, you know, talking about product management, but technically, I mean, if I have to rate myself as a product manager, I mean, you ask people who work with me, they'll rate me at 6 out of 10, maybe. For multiple reasons, I talk about that, why I'm 6 out of 10 and what it takes to be maybe 7 out of 10 or 8 out of 10, and why I couldn't really become 8 out of 10. And obviously, there were multiple other things I was doing. So it was kind of, I didn't make much of an effort, but yeah, we'll talk about how can you be uh, a good product manager. When I say good product manager, I'm assuming all of us, have created product and we all know how to create product. It's just that, what I'm going to talk about today is things that we miss out on day-to-day basis, right? Which may look very obvious, but sometimes, we generally don't follow that. These are like 10, 12 basic product management principles, which in my experience, across last 20 years, having been a very junior product person to managing a team of 4 to managing a team of 40 product managers, and now building my own team again, starting from scratch with just one product manager, or kind of a multitask, someone who's doing product management, operations, customer service, a lot of things. So I've seen multiple organizations where work with multiple product managers. So share some of the things that I've observed, and how we can really overcome that. And they are very simple. I mean, I'm not going to talk about something which is some rocket science. You need to learn something, you need to read a lot. All of us, like I said, have reached here because we've at some organizations or at some colleges we studied how to build products, and then we maybe even created certain products. But let's see how this discussion goes. I would love to have some of the experiences on basis the discussion that we're going to do today, or the points that I'm going to put across today. Some of the experiences that you guys must have had, would love to listen to that, and I'll also share some of the experiences that I have had at Paytm and other products that I've built. So I think to start with, we all say that when you're building product, uh, you should listen to customers, right? Now, that's the fundamental basic rule of product management. But I have seen most of the product managers that, and I'm talking about a large sample base of about 150 200 product managers that I have interacted with, uh, they don't do it. Now, why they don't do it? I mean, obviously there are reasons, but sometimes we miss talking to customers, and then there are people who overdo it. People think that, oh, talking to customers means you have to create groups, you have to go into forums, you have to need to have a session, you need to record those sessions, you need to come up with the analysis of all the user interaction. But that's not true, because frankly, whatever product we are building, we are generally in touch with the kind of users who would be or who are already using your product. Just talk to them casually. Pick up one customer or one user a week. Ask them how they feel about your product. Sometimes someone who's not even used your product understand their needs in the space that you're building your product in. It's that simple. Just keep your interactions very casual. You don't need to have a separate session. It is an ongoing thing. As a thumb rule, maybe talk to 3 or 4 customers slash future users slash current users in a week, and you can just maybe do a chat session or a call or maybe even email is fine, as long as you have some sort of channel open with the customers. It is generally good, and I have seen good product managers, now people who are regarded as very tech wizards or people who understand product development really well. They miss out on this thing, right? So and I keep telling whenever I look at my team, I keep asking them if the feature that they're building or the product document that they've written, what part of it actually or the insights that came from the users, right? Because sometimes we assume that we know a lot about our users, and obviously we keep looking at data when customers are using our product. I mean, data also gives us a good picture, but there's nothing like getting first-hand interaction from customers, right? So my first fundamental principle is talk to your customers as often as possible. Don't try to make it very formal. Keep it very light. Keep it very interactive, and don't ask your customers for solutions, right? So when you're talking to them, try and understand the problem, because solutioning is your problem. Right? You have to come up with a solution, because they can't tell you what they actually need. They can tell you what issues they are facing, what are the challenges that they have in your current product or any other product that they're using, or in the situation that they are in, what exactly is their issue, and how can and it's up to you to really come up with a solution. So second mistake which most product managers do, they listen to their customers for solutions as well, right? Now that is where I think you tend to make few mistakes. Like for example, if there's I think Henry Ford's quote that if he would have gone and asked people what do they need, they would have said faster horses, right? Now that's something you know they just need to reach from point A to point B faster. They don't necessarily need faster horses. That is you need to come up with a solution that how can they reach faster, right? Secondly, I mean, when I'm assuming, when Steve Jobs was designing his iPhone, one of the biggest problem that, and I used to use Trio phone or a Palm phone during that time. We used to have a stylus. And most of these phone makers will give you 2 or 3 stylus, because you'll end up losing those stylus, right? Now, imagine if Steve Jobs would have asked customers, I'm building a touch phone. What is the biggest problem? He said, can you ensure that stylus is tied to the phone? There's a thread that is lying, that is connected to the phone. I mean, that is not the customer's problem. Is that they are losing stylus. That doesn't mean that you need to tie stylus to the phone. He removed stylus altogether. He came up with a stylus which is your finger, right? So the point I'm trying to make here is that customers, talking to them is good, but you need to ensure that you're talking to them for understanding their problems and not necessarily trying to find out solutions from them. So yes, on one hand, listen to them, but don't listen to them for solutions. A second thing which I think uh, I have seen, especially at Paytm and otherwise as well, that we obsess a lot about our competition. Well, there are two views to it. Obsessing about competition is not good, but keeping an eye on them is really good, because end of the day, if they've launched something before you, you get to see a product which is all, you get to see the entire workflow. You get to see something working. You can read the reviews that people are writing on their Play Store or App Store. You can go to social media and see what people are talking about their product. So in a way, just see what they are building, how customers are reacting to their launches, and take some inspiration from there. But don't be obsessed by what they are launching, what features they have, and say, okay, I need to match those features, or I need to really build what they're building, or I need to stay ahead of them, right? Everyone has got their own TG. you have built your own customer base over a period of time, you understand them really well than someone sitting outside. So if you've not launched that feature earlier than your competition, I would see that as an opportunity and see, okay, was this feature which I missed or my users missed, or are their users really using it, right? So the point I'm trying to make here is that look at your competition, watch them, but don't be obsessed by them. And sometimes we really get worried, when they talk about their numbers or metrics. First of all, I would never believe any numbers that is posted by your competition, because that's there's no way of finding out what are the actual numbers, right? So when you can't find out the real numbers, why obsess over it, right? So I generally desist from looking at metrics or numbers which are posted by competition, because that gives you stress. And I've seen that happening personally to myself as well. You really get worried over they're going ahead of you, or you're number 2 or number 3, or you're not able to keep up. All those thoughts would come to your mind, but try and see if you can avoid those thoughts, right? uh, I think another thing which fundamentally, when we are building products, we like to, when we get obsessed with an idea or a feature or a product, uh, and we generally believe it's a good product or feature, one thing that we all miss is that, will your users pay for this feature, right? When I say pay for this feature, it could be an indirect way of paying, right? If you ask them to shell out money for the feature that you're building or the product that you're building, uh, then only go ahead and build that feature. Because sometimes it is exciting to build things which are good looking, which are which makes your developers really happy, or your product managers are really excited about launching something which has not been launched in the market before, or you think it's a paradigm shift. But uh, one basic thing is that eventually you have to make money, right? If users are not going to pay for the feature, try and not prioritizing that feature. I'm not saying don't build it, but uh, feature prioritization is always based on what brings me revenue, right? Because end of the day, that's the two norths that most organizations strive for. That directly or indirectly, whatever I'm building has to derive some revenues. Now there are certain startups which are at pre-revenue stage. I'm sure they'll have one key metric or one single metric which is the most important metric for them. So for it could be unique daily users, it could be time spent, it could be number of sessions, it could be anything. If you're not doing revenue and you are tracking one of these metrics, I also recommend, that's another another suggestion, that don't track too many metrics, right? There has to be only 2 or 3 metrics which drives your business, right? Which, if they go down, will fundamentally bring your business down, or if they improve, your core business will go up. And it's so easy to find out those 2 or 3 metrics, because end of the day, all your core product principles are around those metrics. For example, if it's a news app, uh, for them, I think unique users spending as much time and opening the app multiple times, that in itself is like the maximum that they need to track. Anything else is good for junior product managers, good for data analysts. But if you're able to ensure that more people are opening your app and spending more time, and reading more articles, I mean that's more than sufficient. Everything else is something which you're looking at the funnels, looking at cohorts, looking at the exit, or retention. All those features are, all those metrics are good to track, but eventually that what is that 1 or 2 metric which is going to help your business grow, right? So if it is a commerce app, it's very clear. End of the day, it is the transacting users which are going to get you revenue. So if you are, let's say, at a stage where you may not be unit economics positive, so you should look at unique transacting users month on month, right? I mean, that's one single metric for any commerce app. When I say commerce app, it could be physical products, it could be digital services, right? So for example, at Paytm, we used to have only one metric, which is unique transacting users. That's it. I mean, everything else would fall around it, right? Sorry, going back to the point which I was trying to make, that uh, you should build a feature which you think your users will eventually pay for it, right? So that helps in optimization, that helps in more productivity, because you're able to tell your product managers what is more critical for the business. And obviously it's also uh, uh, end of the day, currently looking at the situation, I think more and more focus would be on product managers who ship features which are eventually going to drive revenues, right? Or bring the unit economics to improve, right? So that's something which I think I keep telling everyone that I work with. We all get ideas. We are all very creative people. We have tons of things that we want to build, but prioritization is always based on one or two metrics. Don't really come up with metrics which are good to have but not necessarily important for the business, right? Uh, so another thing which uh, we keep hearing that as a good product manager, you should try and solve customer queries, because that's that's what gives you insight about what problems are your customer facing. Well, that's good to have, but I generally believe that while customers queries you can solve to understand customer problem, but eventually your task is to ensure that customers do not create queries, right? uh, Focus more on why those queries are being created, why are customers even writing to you. Can you solve the underlying issues which are generating those queries, right? So we get obsessed by saying, oh, I am so close to my customers, I spend one day in a week reading all the tickets, I reply myself, or I take personally I take customer calls. That's great to do, great, good to understand, but as a good product manager, just make sure that you try and reduce the contact ratio, try and reduce the number of tickets or number of calls or number of queries that gets generated, right? So a very simple way of looking at it, right? Whereas you if you're also trying to uh, uh, address to customer queries, if you're reducing it, then you obviously your load is also going down. So I'm talking about lean startups which are not keeping large customer service teams. For them to optimize on the sources is to fix the problem, and then maybe optimize on the queries that are coming in. uh, I think one thing which, and I'm very bad at it, as a product managers, we should learn to say no. I have seen that, and it's linked to the, that uh, feature development that we do. We if we can't say no to a lot of things, we'll end up building features which may or may not necessarily be used by your users. So as a good product manager, you should be able to say no to your business team. You should be able to say no to your customers. Sometimes you should be able to say no to the CEO of the company if they are asking for things, because that, like we discussed, what are those 2 or 3 features which are going to truly make the difference. If you keep saying yes to everything, you'll have list of features which will go into multiple sprints, and then you'll be losing track of what you're building, right? So one skill set which, like I said, I couldn't develop, but I would recommend all of you to work on it. It's not easy to say no to everyone, but that really helps. That will bring, if you develop that skill set, I think, and I'm not saying just say no blindly to everything. The idea is that you should be able to say no with a fundamental goal of building something which, like I said, is core to the business, versus building anything and everything that is shared by the business teams or product teams or anyone else in the organization, right? So because as a product manager, you understand, the journey of your product, what made the difference in the past and what is going to make the difference in the future. So it's in your hand to ensure that only say yes to things which are fundamentally going to drive the business further. And in continuation of that, one thing a good product manager should do is to kill features. We uh, get very personal about things that we build. We get very passionate about products that we've launched. uh, Once we've established that it's not going to work, I mean, obviously we all know in our heart, after maybe few months or few weeks or maybe 6-8 months down the line, that this feature is that we launched is not working. Users are not adopting. You during that time, you could have done couple of iterations. You would have interacted with users. Uh, it's better to kill those features because they'll actually take away a lot of your bandwidth and also put unnecessary stress. So stress of keeping a feature live is more than stress of really taking it out. So I would not hesitate in removing features, and a good product manager is known by number of features that they can kill. Very difficult, but I think very very effective if you're looking at increasing the productivity of your team. And also, I think if you are managing a team of product managers, if you are slightly senior product person and you're working in a bigger organization where you have multiple people reporting into you, uh, one thing which we generally end up doing, because we are social animals, we interact with them, we develop friendly relationships, uh, we try and protect our teams, right? uh, I and again, another of my shortcomings, you have to protect your customers, right? Because customers are driving business for you and not the team that is building those features, right? I mean, you were in a situation where something has not been shipped or something has gone wrong. You cannot, while you should always take responsibility of what went wrong and things which didn't work out, but you cannot protect your team in front of customers. If your customers are facing issues, they come first. I mean, your team can come second. You can address their issues later. You have to address your customers' issues first, right? So that's something which, like I said, a very obvious thing, but sometimes we really prioritize our team over anything else, which is, like I said, not a bad thing to do, but you'll have to make sure that your customers are not getting affected because of that. Uh, I think one thing which probably the last point which I wanted to make before I start taking questions, is mostly the product managers that I have interacted with, and I'm assuming most of you have a higher IQ than the customers that are going to use our products. Now I'm talking about consumer products, mass products, which are used by larger population, people in smaller towns. Uh, you might have a higher IQ, right? You might have better exposure about different products. You obviously have built that product, so you understand the product in and out. It's good to be dumb. Sometimes when you look at your product, it's you have to dumb down your thoughts. You have to, I'm not saying your users are dumb. I don't mistake me for that. The point I'm trying to make here is that your users are not going to invest the kind of energy, the kind of time, the kind of intelligence, the kind of IQ that you are going to put in the product, right? For them, that product that they're using is probably solving one problem or addressing one small issue. So they are not going to put all their energies behind using your product, right? So they're going to be even in all seriousness, they're going to be using 10-15% of your product, right? While you have exposure to the 100% of the product that you build. So it's good to sometimes when you're looking at a product, dumb down in your own mind. Look at a product don't try to think like an intelligent person, right? So I have done interactions with product managers who IITians and IIMs, and they studied a lot, they read a lot of books, they read a lot of articles, they talk to other fellow product managers, they use multiple apps. Users are not like that. Users don't do all that, right? Normal users, when they use apps, they're using app for like 5 minutes, unlike you who are using app to understand how app works, right? So that's the last point I wanted to make here, that you are not the customers. So uh, so don't think like how you would like to use the app. That's why I say it's linked to my first point, that more you talk to your customers, you'll get into their shoes. You understand what kind of language they speak. What do they understand of your product? What do they understand of the labeling that you've done? So you have to make sure that you know you have to think like a common person. Talk to your family members, talk to your fellow product managers, see if you are overthinking about something, or you're getting obsessed about the product. It's always good to disassociate yourself from the product that you build. So that's broadly what I wanted to talk about and open the Q&A and see if we can share some of you can share some of the experiences on the product side that you've experienced, and how you solve those issues and any problem that you face, and how can you look at solving those issues. So open to all of you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Deepak. I think the last point that you said about dumping down is essentially one way of looking at it is that if you continue to see yourself as the user, then you are only building for a very small segment of users for any mass product. Because the number of users who are going to be very similar to you, to everybody who's building, is going to be a much smaller number, while the world is much larger. And to be able to understand those segments, it's like I don't know anybody who can empathize with every single segment
And I think
of users
it's
that they
easier
have.
said than done. We all know that we have to do it, but sometimes we don't end up doing it because it's not easy. Because sometimes it's not easy for us to keep aside our biases, keep aside our passion for the product, and then start using it.
Yeah, and I think if you talk to more and more experienced PMs, you realize that after people have done this mistake multiple times, then they learn. So it's something which you learn. Like it's like cycling. You
Yeah,
learn by
because it
practicing.
comes, that once you made mistakes by launching products which you thought were awesome and they do not work out. Like I said, failure teaches you much better than any successful launch or a successful product, right? So it's good to have
Definitely.
certain failures because you find out the underlying reasons why it didn't work out.
Okay, so we can now take some questions. I think in chat we already have. Saurabh Chopra, do you want to ask your question?
Hello. Yeah, thanks, Divakar. Thanks for giving me the chance. Yeah, hi, Deepak. Saurabh this side.
Hi.
Yeah, hi, Deepak. So, Deepak, I maybe it would be really helpful if you can focus like how analytics plays a big role in day-to-day life of a product manager, and maybe if you can take a couple of examples, like how it impacts the decision making of a product manager, or maybe feature prioritization for a product manager. So that would be really helpful. If you can cover that.
Yeah, okay. So, a good product manager, obviously, they center around all the, like, in addition to talking to customers, center around all the discussions around the analytics, right? The data that they get from the product. So, data is very critical because that gives you first-hand insights on what's happening, right? Having said that, I think I briefly mentioned that don't be obsessed by multiple matrices that you need to track. First, understand the core business that you have and what is that one metric. And I'm saying one metric, not even two. What is that one metric which will fundamentally change the way your business grows, right? And every business can come with that one metric. Some people call it or some people call it OMTM, one metric that matters. There's always that one thing which that if it is growing or degrowing, your fundamentally business is not in the right direction, right? So while it is good to understand, the funnel, good to understand the cohorts, good to understand the time spent, the overall, metrics, but there'll always be, no matter what business, be it commerce, be it gaming, be it fintech, be it content or social, there will be just one metric which will, and product managers by design, because they build that product, they know that what leads to the growth. They by design know that, right? So analytics do play an important role, because like I said, when you're tracking that one metric, that doesn't mean that you are only looking at that one metric. Like, for example, I gave you Paytm's example. That Paytm tracks only one metric, which is number of transacting users. But to drive unique transacting users, you have to automatically ensure that people who download the app, they are signing up. People who are signing up, they are doing their first transaction. People who are doing first transaction, they are ensuring they do crosswalk and do second transaction. And someone who is not coming back, you do all because end of the day, your retention is also linked to number of unique transacting users, because month on month you can't get a lot of new users. So your app install to sign up to conversion to repeat transaction to retention. All that is now linked, because if you don't look at all those things, you'll eventually not be able to meet that one metric that you have. So, but the good part is that one metric makes it easier for everyone in the team to track it. Like, if it makes it ultra easy for product managers to evaluate that effort that they're putting into the product, is it going to help that metric or not? Like, for example, if I am seeing that my target for this month is to grow 5% DAU versus last month, and I have one developer which is currently looking at changing the app icons, or positioning of the app icon. Or now you have to fundamentally ask that, while it may make your app look really good, but can that one engineer for now build something which is affecting the retention, which is affecting the funnel, which is helping, which is making which is letting users drop from sign up page? Or can you reduce a field in your sign up? Can you remove sign up altogether? There are tons of things that a developer can do, versus maybe beautifying the app. I'm not saying improving the UI is not critical, but it's all about prioritization. Now, if you know that you've optimized on, or you can afford to hire multiple developers, and you optimized on the core features, you can continue to build a better UI, because eventually I'm assuming that a UI design change is also led by data that comes in, right? So it again ties into the analytics which a product manager needs to look at.
Thanks, Deepak. Amrit,
And
you want to ask?
Hi Deepak, Amrit this side.
I am
So
ready.
Deepak, I've been following you on Twitter for some time, and I've read on your comments that you get that you are the best boss with whose work people have worked with. So one question is around like
I was the best boss, or no? I made that comment about someone. Who said I'm
no
the best?
no no, they said that you are the best boss for
Who
them.
said that?
I don't remember the name, but I've read
A
that
couple of
at least
people who
three four
said that.
times. Three
Okay.
four times.
I thought
So
I'm tweeting myself that I'm maybe I must have done that maybe once. I don't know.
okay, so my question is basically for someone who's just got into product management. They have 1 or 2 years of experience, and they are now exploring out how they can kind of uh, figure out whether the management is good, or it will provide a good environment for him to grow as a product person for junior product managers. And second is like you mentioned that they need, we need to learn to say no, but for a junior product manager, if something is coming from say a senior folk, how should that person uh, tackle that situation?
Okay. So first, addressing the first part, on the like, I think you asked how to create that product culture, right? How to get the right culture. For Was that the question?
Yeah, create a good culture, and how an outsider, like someone who wants to, can judge that, okay, I have 2 3 companies to look at, which one is having a good culture, because you only get to know once you're inside. That's
That's a
one
good
problem.
question, actually. Yes, that's a good question. Now, generally, when you're a junior product manager, you know, I have mostly, interviewed people who are not necessarily focusing on culture to start with, which I'm not saying right or wrong. Sometimes, as a junior product manager, or or getting into product, you just need to get that faith that you'll be building something independently. You'll be, even if it's a small feature, you will be given charge of something which you will solely be responsible for. Because assistant product manager assisting a product manager in writing certain PRDs, or building certain wireframes will not help you. So the only thing that you should ask during interviews, that will I be held responsible for its success and failure? Now, as an organization, if we can empower the junior guys to build something independently, it could be a small feature. I don't want to take it as a senior product manager. I don't want to take a risk and give something critical to the person. But if I can commit that yes, this is one feature, uh, could be very important, could be less important, could be mildly important. But as long as I'm the only one working on it, that sounds like a good opportunity to me, because that this organization likes to take bet on new people, and if you perform well, chances are that you'll actually be regarded well in that organization, and eventually culture is something that comes from your team members, people, and the kind of effort everyone is putting together, and also it also depends on how the organization is growing, right? If it is growing and there's less pressure on that, you generally have a better understanding between each other. Only when nothing seems to be working and things are breaking, people also starts to break, right? So end of the day, I think, like I said, the only way to judge is that ask for sole responsibility of anything that you're going to build, and that could be a good indicator that how this organization likes to treat its product managers. And second was how to say no if you're a junior guy, right?
Yeah.
How to say no to your seniors, right? Now, like I said, I've not been able to do that. It's difficult, but for that, you need to be very clear that when you're saying no, what are those two things that you are doing for which you're saying no to this? Because you just can't say no and you're sitting idle saying, oh, I don't think this feature is good. If you're sitting idle, you have nothing else to do, I think you should better do it. But if you're building something which that was given to you earlier and it is going to make an impact, and someone comes up and say, okay, I think you should make a change to this feature and build an extension to this feature. Now, if you're confident that last time when you released a feature and it was picked up in a certain fashion and it delivered certain numbers, you can cite those examples, uh, bring data wherever possible, and see if you can objectively say no, right? Sometimes we argue for the sake of arguing, and we say no just because we are busy, or we say no because you don't have bandwidth, which is a legitimate reason for saying no. But sometimes maybe that bandwidth is not being used properly. So I should not say no just because I don't have the bandwidth. I should say no because that feature doesn't make sense. Maybe I am very busy and I'm building something which is less important than this new feature that someone has suggested, or new feature that market has come up with, or new feature that business team is asking. Then I should actually be should have the power to drop the earlier feature that I was working on and start working on this. So saying no necessarily doesn't mean that you are busy, that's why you should say no, or you don't want to do it. So I think it should be data backed, and your confidence will show when you have data in your hand.
Great. Thanks for the answers.
Okay, Chandrasekhar.
Yeah. Hi, Deepak. Thanks so much for such a fantastic webinar where everything was explained in such an easily accessible and understandable way. I'm a product designer from Bangalore, and part of why I joined this webinar was to understand more about what the product management function does. And I also wanted to learn how I, as a designer, I'll be working with engineers, I'll be working with product managers. What can I do as a designer to maximize my own contribution and be more effective as part of an organization?
Okay, so I personally feel that product designers are best poised. I mean, they can become one of the best product managers, because good product managers have had some experience in product designing, right? So I have worked with few of them, and I am really fond of them because of two things. First of all, they, when they are designing the product, because they're truly starting from scratch, right? At max, they're given wireframes by the product managers, but they have to visualize something which has not even come into the picture, and they are now visualizing it. Because they are laying out each and every pixel, they come up with a lot more questions than product managers writing a PRD, right? So product designers' ability to ask questions makes them little more superior, gives them better understanding of their users. And secondly, because as designers, we consume a lot of other apps just to get inspiration. Their exposure is much wider of other products, other apps, than, let's say, a product manager who's actually developing it. Because product designers are by nature creative people, right? So they need a lot of inputs from multiple sources. So that definitely gives them wider exposure. So wider exposure, ability to ask more questions, because they start from scratch, they look at every pixel. I think they are better poised to be good product managers going forward. I mean, the only thing that you need to do is, once you've ensured that the product that you design is done exactly in the same way by the developers, but you should be able to also work very closely with product managers on understanding that why they asked for a certain feature in a particular way versus then you just designing it in the best possible way. So good product designers will ensure that UX is taken care of, but sometimes a very good product designer will also ask the need of that feature at all, right? Maybe good UX doesn't necessarily mean that you designed it really well and people are able to use it well. In first place, do they even need it or not? So like I said, it's connected to your ability to ask questions, and if you can get further deep into why a certain thing is being asked, I think you'll have a better chance of becoming a product manager.
Okay, thanks. This was a great explanation.
Ravi?
Yeah. Hi, Deepak. Ravi here.
Hi, Ravi.
Hi. So one of my questions was when you talked about sort of streamlining the product better, making it in a way a lot leaner. Is there a sort of a mental model or a sort of a model that you follow yourself beyond the data to make the products or features leaner before their launch whilst planning them, and after their launch, which is through data and whatnot? My second question would be, you talked about the importance of failure and how it's a really good teacher. Many of us might for example, I worked on a product and I worked on it for 2 years and it didn't go well. How do I convince, let's say, a third party to come across, to sort of get them to understand what I learned and how I learned because of that failure? How to communicate the value of it to, let's say, a third party?
Okay, so I have not understood the second question clearly, but I'll first try and address the first, and then maybe to refresh my memory, I'll ask the second question again.
No problem.
I think the first question was that how do you really design, how do you create lean products, right? Before launch and maybe post launch, right? I think the simplest way to do that is do early user testing, right? Because if now sometimes we confuse lean product design with less number of steps, less number of screens. Now I have seen product managers getting obsessed by reducing the number of steps. Now sometimes, not depending on your TE, reducing the number of steps is not necessarily a good thing. Users, when they are doing something for the first time, when they are trying to understand your product better, and if your navigation is intuitive, if your app flow is intuitive, if your workflow is intuitive, users do not mind going through multiple screens, as long as they are not feeling overwhelmed by the number of screens. And every screen that comes in, or every click or every tap that comes in, adds more, gives them more context about the feature that they're going to use, right? So just to give you an example, let's say you building, I'll take the simplest of example, the mobile recharge product at Paytm, right? Now, you say as a lean product, user just needs to input a mobile number, and they should just put the amount and make the payment, right? Now that's the leanest way you can do mobile recharge. But if you ask 60% of the users, they don't even know what's the right amount of recharge for them. What's the right package for them, or what are the best packages available from the operator, or based on their past history, what exactly is the right way to. So if I can handhold the user and saying, okay, your operator has these 3 packs which are used by 70% of the users, and based on my understanding of your past 5 recharges, and the gap between those recharges was less than 20 days, 15 days, I understand that you're not actually able to use the entire pack for 30 days or 45 days or 90 days, depending on whatever that pack's worth was. You should pick up XYZ. Now Here you are actually taking user to 3 more screens, telling them about the feature of those packs. But once they do that, they'll actually be thankful to you, because you actually help them get the right package, right? So very basic example where you could have done mobile recharge in 2 steps, but we've stretched the product in multiple screens and multiple steps. As long as it is going to help the user, and users do not feel that we are forcing your way in. For example, your UX should be such that if you are a smart user, you understand what package. If that package is for 349 rupees, a user is inputting 349. You know that user is intelligent. User knows that 349 package stands for something, because all these packs have a unique denomination, right? So there you let user go through the process in 2 steps, right? So that is the I would say the definition of a product which is you can call it lean, you can call it seamless, you can call it a friendly feature, but keeping the user's need in mind, right? User is not necessarily looking at quick checkout. User is looking at the best possible buck for the money, right? So the best possible pack that they can get.
Thank you. Yeah.
And your second question was, can you now repeat it again, because I think I lost the track last time as
well. So you said that failure is a great teacher, and many of us will at some point of time hit failure. How do I communicate the value of the learnings of my particular failure to, let's say, a third party, be it an employer or be it, let's say, a VC or somebody of that sort?
I think, like I said, we all would know why a feature or a product or a startup failed, right? If we built it ourselves, and we know that, let's say, users were not even downloading it, right, in first place.
Yeah.
That means, there was the need of that product never existed. So maybe your thought process was not tuned to what customers want. Maybe the description of your product, the app store, the ASO was so bad that people couldn't really understand why they should download the app. They downloaded, but they never transacted. Maybe your conversion, maybe the product that you were showing to the user upfront were not keeping in mind what users really want. You're not trying to understand the TG. Let's say, for example, it's a fashion app. While they are coming in for the first time, you don't know their gender, you don't know anything about them, but there are certain factors that you know about them, that which location they're coming in from, what device are they using, what kind of connection do they have, Wi-Fi, 4G, what. So based on, and what kind of other apps maybe they are using, some try and gather some data and see if you can be smart about the product that you're going to show them upfront, right? So you would know that, okay, people were not downloading, let's say, problem number 1. Second problem, they were not converting. Third problem, they were not coming back. Maybe their last experience was not that great, the product that you sold was not that great, or the price was not good, or the delivery was not good, or something went wrong with the experience, right? So they didn't come back, or they came back but they never did second transaction. Maybe that your catalog discovery was so bad that they couldn't really find anything worthwhile. Or if it's a non-commerce app, let's say, let's take an example of a gaming app. You build a gaming app, people are not spending money in app, right? They are not eventually, advertisements will not make you revenue, the in-app revenue. Now, why were they not doing in-app? Because the product that they had to buy in-app, people were actually able to play the game for, and then there are multiple games I have seen personally, play the game for months and months without really buying anything in the app, right? And buying a particular in-app feature didn't improve the gameplay or didn't improve my performance. So I would end up not buying it again, right? So, and you would inherently know all this.
Yeah.
So if you can articulate all these reasons, that I know that I built a bad game design, I built a bad conversion engine, I built a bad catalog, I built a wrong supplier, I had a wrong logistic partner, my technology was bad, I could not scale. These are things which are, if you can articulate very clearly, these are direct learnings that you'll have. That, okay, you're not able, your tech was not able to take the scale because your fundamental architecture was wrong. or maybe your architecture was right, your developers were, developers that you picked up, they couldn't write the right code, right? So you know that you're bad at hiring. So I'm saying you will know that, what are things that you didn't do really well last time, and how can you now further improve upon that.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, thanks.
And Deepak, just wanted to add to that this is extremely important to retrospect and figure out what went wrong without getting into using that as a tool for complaining or just blaming, because that could get tempting for people too. That you just try to, if something went bad, people just try to go back and blame. Essentially, this is
First of all, you should, when something is going wrong, you should never blame someone else. There has to be something that you must have also not done right. While the whole organization may have failed, the product may have failed, and there may be multiple people working on it. And you can say, okay, those two people didn't work, but you were also part of the team, right? You could have said things which would have, fixed those things much in advance. So, like you rightly said, there's no blame game, and that's something which you should always desist from, because that never helps. Because if you were part of the team, if you were there, you are also equally responsible for its failure. Because when product succeeds, like you're also responsible for its success, you get all the praises for that. You should also be taking big bets for its failure.
Shruti, you I think have a similar question.
Yeah, coincidentally, I have an almost similar question. How soon should someone identify that there has been a failure, whether in a feature or a business model? Considering, from where I think it, there is ever-changing marketscape, there is space, there is ever-changing technology, there is competition inching towards you or ahead of you, and you are also trying to sustain a business. So how soon should somebody identify a failure, and when one does that, how does one pivot out of it?
So in my opinion, based on purely my experience, 2 iterations, if it still doesn't work out, it won't work out. Because if you're a good product manager, every iteration, obviously you are trying to improve on the initial release. After 2 iterations, it doesn't work, chances are it won't work. The 3rd iteration is not going to do any wonders that will suddenly start working. So, and those 2 iterations can be, depending on your sprint cycle, can be 6 weeks, can be 8 weeks, but during that period, or maybe it could be 3 months, but you will get to know, whenever those iterations happen and nothing is picking up, or not picking up as the way you really wanted, it's time to drop it. And it's better to drop it earlier than, just dragging your feet.
Yeah, that's why I asked how soon. All right, thank you.
Okay, Santram, you have a question on NPS? I think he's not there, but the question was that what is your opinion to consider NPS as a metric for product managers?
Absolutely, no. I think we should keep an eye because that directly tells you, what customers feel about your product. So yes, it's one of the important metrics. It's just that sometimes and I have seen that in my 24 years of experience, that product with good NPS may be really bad at unit economics. Maybe didn't make sense for investors to continue funding. So that cannot be the only metric that product manager should look at. It's good to have a positive or a healthy NPS, but that is not a reflection of a healthy business model. Maybe let's say if I'm let's say if I was doing air tickets and I was giving 20% discount on every air ticket, or chances, and I have a better UX, better UI, and I have a good customer service, chances are that I'll have a very high NPS, right? But then I'll end up shutting it down in few months.
Okay, Shailesh, you can ask your question.
Hi Deepak, great session. Slightly off-topic question. I wanted to pick your brain on what do you think about the fintech wave, or do you even think there is a fintech wave that will come in the next decade? And we are seeing a lot of success with the UPI. In the retail banking, there are neobanks that are coming up, and there are payment interfaces that are surfacing up in the business side, etc. So I just wanted to pick your brain on what do you think about the fintech wave that will come in the next decade. What are the important factors that you see will shape that whole thing up, and where do you see it going, especially in India, Southeast Asia markets?
Okay, So fintech is a very, very broad domain, right? In fintech, you start from payments, you get into financial services products, and then you do multiple investment products and wealth products. So fintech is, and then of course banking products, and it's dominated by large incumbents, the big organizations, not just in India, globally. It's not going to be not going to be easy to disintermediate them, because you need, unlike other domains, be it entertainment, OTT, or commerce, where the experience can be quickly built in few years, maybe 4 to 7 years horizon, where you can slowly transition users from their old way of transacting, old way of buying stuff, old way of consuming content, old way of reading news, to a newer experience. Banking, investments, wealth services, payments, these are very, very slow changes that you'll see happening in any industry right now. Banking especially right now, all the power to the neo banking startups that are launching in India, because they have to be in it for a long run. This is one product where you'll not see overnight success. You'll have to be at it for multiple years, slowly build it piece by piece, because like I said, in banking alone, there are 20 to 30 products that you can build. So that is something which, as an industry, we all need to understand that, we are going to slowly change it over next 15 to 20 years. So this is not an industry where you move fast, break things. Here you actually go a little slow, fundamentally change consumer behavior, and eventually, I think, you will see that in next 10-12 years, this shift, when this happens, then the whole movement will run very faster, right? Initially, you may not see, for next 5-6 years, you'll not see neo banking making any impact. For next 5-6 years, you'll not see investment startups or wealth startups or insurance startups making any impact. But once they proliferate, and once they understand the sector, and once they build the equity among the top of the pyramid, then next 5 years you'll see this growth really going in an exponential way. So startups will continue to come. Startups which are in it right now, I think they're the brave ones, because like I said, they are building the framework. But I think 5 years down the line, 6 years down the line, when you are doing a startup in fintech, you'll have much easier way in versus what you have right now. So like I said, even though I'm also building something in fintech, and I know it's going to be super early for me, but I think we're not going to see overnight success in this, and we should not even aim for overnight success. I mean, overnight here could be 10 years, 12 years. So be in it for long term, and I see India, not just India, globally also, a lot changing in this sector.
Thank you.
Yep. Interesting times ahead. And yeah, Ashwin, next you want to ask?
Yeah. Hey Deepak, Ashwin here. Thanks for doing this. So you've been a part of two fairly different journeys, right? One with your Paytm journey, and the second one with your current startup. So my question to you is more around the fact that at 0 to 1 stage, there would obviously be choices that you would have to make between business and product, right? Do you think of this more in terms of business versus product sort of a decision, or what's the sort of framework that you kind of have in mind when these sort of conflicting decisions are to be made, more from a stage where you are at or more from a stage where the product is at a 0 to 1 sort of a category, right? Yeah.
So when you're starting up, or when you're launching your product, or you're at a pre-launch stage, frankly, you are taking a lot of guesses. While that you understand TG, you talk to a lot of people, you do a lot of market research, but you're still playing blind, right? So fundamentally, you should focus first on your business, that the business that you are building, does it going to fundamentally address the challenges that a consumer is facing? Your product may evolve, right, from launch, and I can bet I've never seen any product that on the day of launch is similar once you crossed maybe 1 year into operations, right? Your product will dramatically change. you will junk your first initial version, you will junk your first 2 versions, because that is something which, like I said, once you launch it, the real understanding will come from the market, from actual users. So to start with, for example, I'm focusing on ensuring that the business fundamentals that I'm trying to solve are actually addressing the right needs. The building blocks that I'm creating right now are actually going to aid my business. Product is a function of solid business, built solid business model, and I built a interface layer on top of it. Now that interface layer may or may not work, but if that business, as long as the business is solid, I know that this business has potential. In couple of iterations, I should actually be able to bring the actual core business that I was trying to, or actual core problem that I was trying to solve, and able to solve those for the customers. So to answer your question, priority on fundamental business first. Product will, especially in initial stages, product will evolve. You will never have a perfect product in first launch. First 2 launches are going to be junked, and then once you cross first 2 launches, third one, you'll have fairly good understanding, and by that time you also streamlined your business. You should be able to build a better product from there on.
Got it. Great. Thanks.
Ankit Gupta.
Hi Deepak. Thanks. I'm Ankit from Bangalore. So thanks for the session, Deepak. And I think what I want to ask is from your journey from your earlier stint at Times and then again back at Paytm. So you worked on applications or let's say projects or programs which are high growth. And also you briefly also mentioned about North Star metrics and balancing between the customer experience metrics like NPS, as well as growth metrics. Let's say for Paytm, you mentioned that the North Star was unique transacting users per month.
Right.
So how do you think as a growth head, you intend to balance these 2 metrics? So one of them not necessarily mean that, okay, the other will improve. So for example, adding cashback, your NPS will also increase, your business metrics will also increase, at least the one which you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
But that you also pointed out that it may not be the right way to move forward for the organization. So in this situation, how did you think of did you think of a different North Star metrics, or were you like, this is my L0 metric, but L1 metric is gross margin, for example. So as a growth, how do you manage and balance out these 2 ends?
Okay. So, it's actually a very good question. So let's say, when you are looking at improving your, let's say, improving transacting users, you want more and more transactions, you want more and more people to try out your product. And the business allows you to pass on some benefit back to the customers. But as long as you are sure that, if they use your product once or twice with the incentive, third time, it is a habit forming product, and third time, they may, I'm not saying there's any guarantee, but they may use your product without any incentive, right? So for example, in 2012, when I joined Paytm, Paytm was a very small organization back then. Paytm introduced this concept of cashback. I mean, this was something which everyone said, it's a low margin business. Why you want to pass on the margin back to the customers? But we fundamentally knew that doing recharges offline, going to a shop in 2012, you have to actually physically go to a shop, pay cash, and then rely on that person's knowledge of the various packs available, because every operator would have hundreds of packs. That person will recharge, and then if you have need at 2 o'clock in the night, or 12 o'clock in the night, or 7 in the morning, there's no way to do your recharge. So we knew that once it becomes someone who starts doing recharges online, they will never go back offline. I mean, this was one product which, let's say, for example, if you book rail tickets online, there is no way you'll start go back doing it offline. Bus tickets, movie tickets. So when you know that fundamentally you are changing the behavior, but for that you have to initially incentivize the user, there you actually build up your marketing budget, and and do forecasting for next 6 to 8 months. And then you know that, okay, the average repeat rate of a user in this particular transaction, if it's a movie ticket, then every quarter you need to sell one. If it's bus ticket, every 6 months you need to sell one. If it's recharge, then every month you need to have someone coming, electricity bill. So the repeat rate, how often the customer is going to repeat. Now if you know that, okay, after 2 transactions, customers should ideally be not using any incentive. So build your business model with that. Now even after 2 transactions, you see that the moment you stop giving incentive to the customer, transaction drops. Maybe your product experience was bad. Maybe the recharge got delayed, or maybe they created multiple accounts. You allowed them to create multiple accounts, get multiple time benefits. So the point I'm trying to make here is that if it was a habit forming product and still people didn't really they still dropped after using your product, there could be 5 other problems that which you never identified. So always try and pass on incentive where for next 3 to 6 months this incentive will pay back.
And how do you balance between NPS and this growth? So for example, you mentioned about cashbacks, right? And in Paytm case, they kept on giving cashbacks for a very long period of time. And now eventually Google Pay came in, PhonePe came in, and they started giving cashbacks while Paytm stopped. Customer base would have migrated to those apps. And so that's why I'm saying that how do you build that differentiated mode so that you balance out between NPS, customer experience part, as well as the growth part piece of it?
No, so like the core still remains your product experience, right? All these cashbacks and everything else that you do. So when I say product experience, the failure rates that customer sees, the customer experience, the resolution, when they seek help from your support, the various interfaces that your app has, the kind of push notification that you send, or if you are available in multiple languages, how easy it is to use the app in their own native language. All that experience builds over a period of time, right? And you will always have customers who get hooked onto you, right? Because otherwise business, like for example, like you mentioned, Google Pay came in, PhonePe came in, but Paytm kept on growing because they had 60-70% of the base who were habitual of using Paytm. And the kind of features that Paytm introduced, be it seamless integration with Zomato, seamless integration with Uber, or you could actually pay at all the organized stores as well as unorganized stores. Someone who starts to use your, like I said, 3 or 4 varying features, you've really hooked them on. Now that is where the product manager role comes in. That what is that turning point, or what is that key movement in the app? Is it the third feature that they use? Is it the 4th transaction that they do? Is it the amount of cashback once they get, or is it the need to go to customer support multiple times, or less need to go to customer support? Now, all these things, as a product manager, that this is what leads to stickiness. And that is the reason products survive no matter what competition does or competition gives. You'll always have migrants. You'll always have people looking at incentives, people looking at trying out new apps, people getting bored of your app, or you've done overkill of features. That always happens, but you need to quickly identify that stickiness quotient that your app has, and continue to focus on that. And don't worry about competition. You will lose customers because you're also going to gain customers when they acquire new customers, right? Because some of their customers are also going to try out your app.
Thank you.
That fundamentally happened with Paytm, right? I mean, Google Pay and PhonePe, they started pushing UPI a lot, and everyone wanted to try out Paytm UPI as well. So while Paytm Wallet was very popular, but Paytm UPI adoption increased because the number of users, they significantly increased. They also started trying out other payments apps.
Sure. Thank you, Deepak.
Aditya Gupta. Deepak, we have 3 more questions if that's okay.
Yes.
Okay. Aditya?
Yeah, hey Deepak.
Hi, Aditya.
Just wanted your views on, what do you think about this whole new terms which I use, which is, built for Bharat or next billion users versus what you typically, call in terms of market or user types, so to say. And since Paytm, I believe, and the likes address pretty much all markets that exist, right? So is there any specific cue for using these terms, or do we just leave them at terms as such?
Okay, so India, if you look at the India population, and generally, people who say that when you're building for Bharat, you're looking at tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. Bharat exists in bigger cities as well. So Bangalore, Delhi, Bombay have equal population of people living below poverty line, people who are migrants, people who are blue collared, people who are earning less than 50,000. In India, less than 4% people actually paying them tax, right? So the entire India, that means, is earning less than 5 lakh rupees a month, right? Only 60 to 70 million people actually are able to comfortably understand English, read English, right? So that means of 500 million people who are on internet, almost 85% are not comfortable with English. They can read English, but I mean, that is not their preferred language, right? So literally you're talking about the entire population of India behaving in a particular way, right? So for me, India is Bharat, Bharat is India, because when you're building, while you can build for that top 2-3%, but eventually I think when you're building, you should not restrict yourself with this definition of India versus Bharat, because you'll get confused, because at the end of the day, you'll be confused that should I build for smaller towns, should I build for bigger cities but a particular TG, or should I build for because sometimes you'll have this top 4% of taxpayers also in tier 2 or tier 3, right? So now you'll be confusing yourself when you are going by that definition. The only thing that you need to focus on, can I build product which is going to be useful to millions of users, irrespective of where they are located. If they are all located in Bangalore, fine. As long as you're getting 5 million users, you should not worry about it. If they are all located in, let's say, Gujarat, that's fine. If you're getting 20 million users from tier 4 cities, absolutely fine. I'm saying as long as you're getting users, doesn't really matter where they're coming in from, as long as they're using your app. Don't be obsessed that, I've seen bigger startups, they get obsessed by going deeper into India, while they're still not solved. They've still not got 100% of users from bigger cities using their app, right? So for example, if you look at, I'll take an example of Swiggy or Uber, Zomato, or Uber and Ola. While it's good to go deeper into India, launch in multiple cities, but I'm sure they still not have cracked 100% of Delhi, 100% of Hyderabad, 100% of Pune, right? There's still a lot of people who are still using their own vehicles. They're still not exposed to Uber, Ola. They're still not exposed to Swiggy, Zomato. So obviously, if you have unlimited resources, you can go further deep into the country, but with limited resources, you should try and focus on a market which gets you users. Doesn't really matter. It is Bharat, it is India, it is tier 1, it is tier 2, it is English speaking, it is Hindi speaking. So I focus mostly on usage, less on where they're coming in from.
Got it. Yeah, thanks.
This is so true, especially because of the mobile penetration now. Over the years, users are everywhere.
Yeah, you can build a great blue collar service for people in Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, and you still get millions of users.
Yep.
Okay, Rupin.
Hi, Deepak. Thanks for the session. I had a question in the B2B space. I work in the B2B space. Their user bases are smaller. They're not in millions, right? And there are multiple levels of approvals required. And there is quite a dichotomy between what the end user wants and what the decision maker wants, right? When you're building a product, and especially if you're building a product which is not, and my domain is digital advertising. So again, battling against giants there. So in that sense, do you build for the end user or do you focus on the decision maker?
I think the answer is very simple. You try and build for the end user, but decision maker will always have its own say. It's not going to be always unlisten to the decision maker and build only for the user, because end of the day, decision maker is decision maker because they are at that position because either they have more experience, or they've done something similar in the past, or it's because of their authority or their investment, or for some reason they are decision makers, right? So you can't find them. So
Yeah.
so in B2B space, I think even though I've not worked much on B2B, so that's why I don't, I give myself 6 out of 10 when it comes to product manager, because that's one area where I didn't really do much. But here, user testing plays a far bigger role, because here the environment is controlled. You can, release your feature to your trusted customers, get feedback, because here you are either you're not talking about millions of users, you're talking about
Yeah.
maybe thousands of
100.
users.
Yeah. 100,000.
Hundreds of users. Here, even if you can get 2 trusted customers to try your product, become your guinea pigs for 2 months, you'll be able to balance out between both decision makers and what your customers want, because you'll actually be able to pass on the feedback that is coming in from your early to beta customers, and decision maker will also have a far better understanding of the customer
A
needs.
level of comfort, I guess.
Unlike consumer product, where sometimes it is not easy to find out what customers want. I mean, there are millions of users using a product, they all behave differently. Pattern forming is difficult initially, sometimes it is impossible. So they may get caught up in multiple scenarios, and get confused between balancing between decision making and customer needs.
Yeah.
I think B2B, if you can get those beta customers to trust you, but you'll have to listen to the decision maker, because like I said, they are in that position to enable this product development for you.
Okay. Thanks, Deepak.
Last question from Venkatesh.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Deepak, for this wonderful session. I have a question that what's the next trend do you see in the digital media startup space, as the revenue stream would dry out, the revenue that largely come from advertisement would dry up in the next 1.5 years. Just to add one more quick question, I know Diwakar said to ask only one question. How much threat do you see WhatsApp Pay possesses to Paytm and other UPI-based payment companies at large?
Okay. So, first question, advertising, you said revenue may dry up, right? Now, unfortunately, it may not dry up. Facebook and Google may, take away even larger share. Even though they have 85% share right now, they may end up taking 90% share. So, market will grow because it's the fundamental need to acquire customers, right? So, if you have to acquire customers, you have to spend money. You have to spend money, you'll have to do some sort of marketing. The only unfortunate part is that Google, Facebook will take away the lion's share, and a lot of other organizations who are in this space may not benefit much from this growing market, because their economies of scale and their understanding of customer, their access to data is much higher than anyone else in this space. So yes, the overall market may not grow for a lot of organizations, but advertisement market will not go down. Like for example, if you are an app developer or you are a publisher who have built a large base, the good part is that you can monetize your inventory using Google, Facebook, while the ROI will be lesser, but just because they are stronger, they have a better ability to serve ads. You will, instead of building your own sales team, instead of building your own BD team, you rely completely on them to serve ads. That could be, but obviously, depending on the business model, if ad revenues is good enough or not. But the point I'm trying to make here is that advertisement is not going anywhere. You need to continue to, like, everyone needs to continue to acquire customers, and to acquire customers, they need to spend money, and eventually it will flow into the system. You need to be smart enough to capture that money that is coming into the system. And compare to WhatsApp and UPI, right? I think it's going to be very interesting. WhatsApp will make it very easy for people to pay money to each other, right? So WhatsApp will take away a a lot of P2P share. Now, in UPI, you have P2P and P2M, people going and paying at shops. Now, paying at shops, initially, in India is not a DIY market, right? And it may change dramatically, by the way. We are talking as of 2020, merchants do require some sort of hand-holding. So the reason why PhonePe, BharatPe, Paytm, they are able to, go penetrate into this market because they were able to, acquire these merchants. So I think the initial market which WhatsApp will target will be the P2P market. So Google Pay share is in danger because they are the largest P2P market holders right now, simply because of the product that they build. So I think they are more than PhonePe and Paytm. I think it's Google Pay which is going to take a hit because PhonePe, like I said, even though they are big on UPI, but I think they are focusing more on P2M. Paytm also focusing more on P2M, plus Paytm also focuses on other payment instruments, not just UPI wallet, UPI card. So they are a payments player versus a UPI player. So yes, WhatsApp will fundamentally change the way people pay to each other, make it much easier. It will definitely bring a lot of new users. Like I said, if Google Pay can continue to engage their users, because it's no different if I'm sending money from WhatsApp versus I'm sending money from Google Pay. It's still maybe 2 steps, 3 steps. It's just that Google Pay doesn't have the context, right? So WhatsApp has the context that, have you delivered this? Or I'm sending you money. Can you please do that for me? So that context is very important, which Google Pay tried building with chat inbuilt into Google Pay, but that didn't take off, right? So they should have anticipated this maybe 1 year back or 2 years back, that people will need context around payment. Payment is not just a transaction; it's also some sort of history behind why you're making a payment. It could be a rent payment. It could be giving loan to your friend or something, which is what WhatsApp is going to solve. So when context gets attached to the payment, that too seamlessly because part of the chat, people will they will take away a large share. And they will bring in a lot of new customers. Now, once they bring in a lot of new customers, since they're going to focus less on frills and features over P2P, like scratch card or spin the wheel or offers or pay at this shop and get that. This is my personal opinion that they will focus less on this. This is where Google Pay, Paytm, PhonePe will still have a role to play because there will be these new customers who are coming in. They will have some sort of pull towards incentives, pull towards feature discovery, pull towards local discovery, which these 3 apps can do, which WhatsApp may not necessarily focus for a couple of years. So all these apps still have 2 years to continue to cement their position in P2M, while WhatsApp will focus more on P2P.
Thank you, Deepak. I will not ask another question, but I would want to hear some closing thoughts from you. Like, what advice would you want to give everybody who's in a startup, who's either a product manager or a founder or a dev or designer, on how to look at the coming 6 months to 1 year in an optimistic way, like 1 or 2 points on, because there is a lot of skepticism and pessimism going around because of the scenario in the world. But in this, how can the creators of products and startups can still thrive?
Okay, so I think the positive out of this situation is that from here on, consumption will go up only, right? As a customer, as a service provider, as a business provider, we will not go further up. While economy may take a hit, that because the income levels will go down and people will have unemployment, but you will still see whatever product that you are building, whatever services that you are offering, consumptions getting improved next 6 months, right? So you'll in a way you got 6 months to reset yourself with less pressure of your month-on-month growth that you were seeing earlier. So it's kind of a reset, which also has given you a lot of time to think about things that were tech debts or product debts, which you can now pay, and start from absolutely new plate. And I think that in itself is an opportunity that you have less, because like I said, whatever numbers I'm going to see in May are definitely going to be better than April, right? I don't have that pressure of number which I had in January to achieve in May, right? I think everyone's expectation has been brought down, which is a good thing, because now, that certainly that race you were in to have that rapid growth month on month, people know that, it's not going to happen. So that gives you ample time to actually fix things which you are not able to focus on.
Okay. Thank you very much, Deepak. It's been a pleasure listening to you. Can we all just give him a big round of applause, as much as we can do remotely?
Interact with you. Thank you for staying with me.
Thank you.
Okay, see you guys. Bye.
And all the very best with your new venture. I hope it's brewing really well.
I'm hoping to launch it in month of June. Let's see.
All the very best, Deepak. Thank you so much for your
Thank you, Deepak.